Chris Kreider is officially a former New York Ranger. But will Mika Zibanejad be next?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1333 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, Jon Chik. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet is a winner. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So it's been a little while since we talked. I was on vacation for about a week there, but we're back in the saddle, back behind the microphone here, and obviously very excited to be back talking with you guys once again, as always, about what else New York Ranger hockey. And it just so happens the season is now over. Last night was Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final, and the Florida Panthers basically just did whatever they felt like doing, beat the Edmonton Oilers, closed out the series, won their second straight Stanley Cup. Gonna have some thoughts on that a little bit later in today's episode, including why I believe the Rangers, why everything that happened in the playoffs essentially is evidence why the Rangers made the right decision in paying Igor Shesterkin. But I want to kick off today's episode by talking about Mika Zibanejad, because obviously Kreider was traded. That was the last episode that I recorded before the vacation break here. And I mean, look, there's going to be a lot more Kreider content coming your guys' way in the upcoming days and weeks and whatnot here. We've got a lot more to talk about with the Kreider situation. And obviously there's a lot going on there. And certainly one of the heavier moments that the Rangers have had in recent seasons, trading the guy that's been here for about a decade and a half. But naturally, once Kreider was traded, it begged the question, does this now make it more likely that Mika Zibanejad will be traded as well? The short answer there, I would say, is yes. But I don't think it makes it that much more likely. It makes it a fraction more likely because, after all, Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider, we know how close the two of them are. They've been playing together for the Rangers forever. Maybe with Kreider moving on, Mika would be more open to the idea of doing the exact same thing. But all accounts, all evidence pointed to Mika remaining with the Rangers. That was true the last time we talked, and everything that came out during my brief vacation break there, it points to the same thing, that Mika Zibanejad is more likely than not to remain with the New York Rangers going forward. And he's got 5 years left on his contract. Again, I've maintained that this is the most likely outcome for a lot of reasons. To begin with, the full no-move clause. He's also under no obligation to waive said full no-move clause. And you can get mad at the Rangers for giving out these provisions in the contract that you can block a trade from any team for the duration of the contract. You can be mad about the contract itself. You can be mad at Mika Zibanejad for the way that he played this past season. All that is fair game. The one thing that I will always defend a player, whether it's Mika or anybody else on the Rangers or anybody else across the entire National Hockey League, is that if you've got a full no-move clause, you are well within your right to exercise that. And if Mika Zibanejad wants to do that, he's no exception. He's allowed to make use of that provision in his contract, and I don't really hold it against him, because when teams sit down and negotiate deals, there's going to be concessions on both sides. And if you get a full no-move clause worked into your contract, then very likely you're leaving at least a little bit of money on the table. Now, how much, we don't know. And obviously, Mika is very well compensated for what he does. He makes $8.5 million per season. But the bottom line, a deal's a deal. The full no-move clause is in there. And Mika, once again, like I said, has every right to use it. There have, however, since, again, the last time we talked, been a couple more, kind of interesting tidbits that have come out about Mika Zibanejad and just where everything stands between him and the Rangers and whatnot. For starters, we had an article written by Molly Walker, a couple of interesting notes to come out of said article. To begin with, I found this interesting. Mike Sullivan, obviously the new head coach of the New York Rangers, he apparently flew out to Sweden to meet with Mika Zibanejad and his family. Now, exactly what was discussed, I'm not sure, but obviously they're kind of breaking bread there, I guess you could say. And I'm sure talking about the upcoming season and what the expectations are. And it's good to know that, Mike Sullivan is already starting to build a relationship with the Ranger players, guys that he's coached against for many years, a lot of the players on the Rangers, and for so long has been seen by certainly us fans as the enemy. Good to know that he's already working on building, personal relationships with his players, Mika Zibanejad included. Also, again, per this article from Molly Walker, Chris Drury has this offseason been keeping New York Ranger veterans up to and including Mika Zibanejad in the loop about the team's plan. Apparently, Drury was very transparent, very honest and open with the Ranger veterans that Chris Kreider was very likely to be traded this offseason. That includes Chris Kreider as well. Kreider, like I said, we'll get to some more news about him in the coming days and weeks here. But it sounds like Kreider was kept up to speed on the situation, that he would likely be traded. It sounds like the same can also be said for Mika Zibanejad and the other Ranger veterans. Now, Drury's under no obligation to do this, but we saw Ranger players complaining about, the lack of communication and whatnot. So, hey, Drury is, I guess, meeting them halfway in some aspect here and keeping them informed. He doesn't have to do that, but he's doing it. So if nothing else, we can't have Mika or any other Ranger veterans complain about a lack of communication. If he's letting them know, listen, I'm probably trading Kreider. It is what it is. I'm letting you know that this is going to happen. At least, if nothing else, nobody can complain about not being kept in the loop this upcoming season. Also, per this article, Mika Zibanejad and his family recently purchased a new home, and Mika also campaigned for the Rangers to bring back David Quinn as one of Mike Sullivan's assistants for this upcoming season. All of this, everything in this article, everything I just discussed here, this all adds up to somebody that is not planning on being traded. And again, he's got the full no move clause, so he controls his own destiny as far as that is concerned. Also in this article, we had a quote from Mika Zibanejad's wife, Irma, about, again, just the entire situation. We just had Mika's new coach here at our home. He flew over from New York recently. We also just got our new home in New York. I'm always shocked about how newspapers just spread things without considering the source. And there were a couple of reports out there from various writers, various national reporters, various Ranger beat writers that, it's possible that Mika could be traded. I think Arthur Staple was the one that hinted at the fact that Drury and Mika had a conversation that it could be best to move on. But I think what was in the article was at least somewhat taken out of context. It doesn't sound like it was really that extreme. Maybe a conversation was had, but again, this all adds up. Everything we just discussed here adds up to somebody that is not planning on waiving his no move clause. There were also some other, bits of news about Mika Zibanejad. This comes to us from Elliot Friedman on his 32 Thoughts podcast. Per Elliot Friedman, again, very reputable reporter, somebody that is usually on the ball and usually very accurate. Rangers have not formally asked Mika Zibanejad to waive his no move clause or even to provide them with a list of teams that he would be willing to be traded to. So it sounds like there's nothing really cooking on that front. This I love too. This is also per Elliot Friedman. It sounds like the Rangers are going to do something that I have strongly been advocating for ever since really the Rangers traded for JT Miller. And it sounds like what that is that Mika Zibanejad will essentially be connected to the hip with JT Miller this upcoming season. The Rangers are fully preparing to have JT Miller at center and have Mika Zibanejad on his right wing. We saw this down the stretch this past season. Pretty much ever since JT Miller came back to the Rangers, that was the line, or at least that was 2/3 of a line. We saw Mika play with JT Miller. Now, it was not perfect, but Mika Zibanejad played a heck of a lot better as a line mate of JT Miller than he had at any other point during the season. I don't know what we were watching during the first half of the season, but when JT Miller came back, Mika's offensive production went up, and the eye test was a heck of a lot better as well. He just seemed more engaged. And honestly, I've talked about this in the past too. Mika seemed more physical when he was playing with JT Miller. We know JT Miller, he's kind of a bull in a china shop, north-south kind of a player, and somebody that, that kind of play, I think, can rub off on line mates. And I think we saw that at least a little bit with Mika Zibanejad. When you play with JT Miller, we know he brings a lot of fire, a lot of intensity. He is going to keep you honest out there. And I think, again, we did see that at least a little bit with Mika. There's times where I think certain players, whether it's Mika or anybody else, you almost get a little bit too comfortable. JT Miller is one of those dudes that's going to keep everybody on their toes. And I don't think anybody benefited from that more than Mika Zibanejad when JT Miller was reacquired by the Rangers. So for me, that's the one thing that you write in Sharpie for the opening night lineup this upcoming season. Everything else can kind of be up for grabs, battle for who's going to be on the penalty kill and who's going to be on this line and who can work his way into the top six and who's going to make this team. That's all well and good. Mika, though, if you want to get the best out of him next season, and it sounds like he's going to be here, and I can assume that that's what the Rangers would like to do, then put him with JT Miller. End of story. JT Miller at center, Mika Zibanejad at right wing. I don't care if you make that the first line or the second line, however you want to pencil it in, but those two have to be together on a line next season, assuming once again that Mika is indeed back to start this upcoming year. One other thing that I mentioned very briefly just a second ago, and work my way back to it right now, is Mika Zibanejad apparently very much advocated for David Quinn to return to the New York Rangers. Now, for full frame of context and why Mika might have been a proponent of bringing David Quinn back, Quinn was, of course, the Rangers head coach for 3 seasons from 2018-19 to 2020-21. In those 3 seasons combined, Mika had 95 goals and 104 assists for a total of 199 points in 195 games. So you put those 3 seasons together, Mika was a point-per-game player and really established himself as one of, honestly, the elite two-way centers in the NHL. I mean, he had to be a top 10 center in the league at that time. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. Those were obviously some of his best seasons under David Quinn. That's when Mika really began to come into his own as, again, an elite player in this league. Mika was very good the first 2 seasons that the Rangers moved on from David Quinn as well, but it was under David Quinn when Mika truly became a breakout player, truly became a star, and truly became a player that Ranger fans loved. I mean, it's hard to believe that based on how Mika played this past season for the majority of it and the way Ranger fans reacted to him, myself included, by the way. But yeah, I mean, he was a beloved Ranger and a do-it-all center, and a lot of that happened under David Quinn. So, look, if Mika gets anywhere near this season what he was when David Quinn was the head coach, then I think that's all it's going to take for David Quinn to win over Ranger fans. If we see a version of Mika Zibanejad that looks like he's fixed for this upcoming season, David Quinn is probably going to get a lot of the credit, maybe even more so than he deserves. I mean, I can't say for sure. If Mika were to round back into form, would it be having a lot to do with David Quinn? How much credit does this guy deserve? Does that guy deserve? If he's with JT Miller, is that the reason for Mika's resurgence? If it does happen this upcoming season, we'll see. But the bottom line, it does sound like Mika wanted David Quinn back. And again, all this is to bring everything full circle and say this is somebody that doesn't sound like he's going anywhere in a trade. Because if the Rangers are going to let Mika influence their decisions and at least take his opinion into account when it comes to rehiring David Quinn as an assistant, why would you then trade Mika Zibanejad, right? Like, that just wouldn't really make any sense. So, again, I know there's people that want to see the Rangers move on from Mika. I get where you're coming from. I wouldn't hate the idea either, but facts are facts. I'm being as realistic about this as I possibly can be, and I think Mika's coming back next season. And if that's the case, again, you put him with JT Miller, you hope for the best. There's a redemption story here that could be written. It all really just comes down to how badly does Mika Zibanejad want to rewrite his own redemption story, because he is not nearly as bad of a player as we saw him be in the first half of last season. We got glimpses in the second half of the player that Mika Zibanejad could be, maybe that he still is. We'll see how it goes moving forward here, but how bad does Mika Zibanejad want it? I think this all comes down to Mika Zibanejad and where his head is at and how bad he wants to get back to the player that he was before this last season or two here. So specifically last season, more so than the year before that. But yep, that's where things stand with Mika Zibanejad. I don't think he's going anywhere, and we just got to hope for the best. And like I said, connect him with JT Miller at the hip. In just a second, we're going to shift our attention to another Ranger with a somewhat uncertain future. That's going to be Zac Jones, impending RFA with arbitration rights. Will he be back next season? What kind of a role will he have? We'll discuss that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there has never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game, before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. There's all kinds of interesting parlays going on there. We're nearing the crowning of an NBA champion, and the best way to spice things up is to head on over to FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, it is the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you will get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's go and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers as always for sticking with everything that happens with the New York Rangers, hanging around with this podcast throughout the season, the offseason, the whole 9 yards. Coming up on this podcast, like I said earlier, we're going to have some more Chris Kreider-centric episodes. We're eventually going to have his top 10 best moments as a Ranger. That's going to take some serious homework, though. We're going to save that for a little bit down the road, especially with the draft and free agency coming up. We'll probably save it for after all that good stuff. Also, sounds like there's some serious smoke regarding K'Andre Miller and the possibility of him being traded. So might dive back into that in the next episode as well. And also draft and free agency right around the corner, like I mentioned just a second ago. So a whole lot more draft-centric stuff, free agency-centric stuff as well. But for right now, let's go ahead and shift our attention to Zac Jones and a recent report, once again from Molly Walker, that the Rangers and Zac Jones have discussed the possibility of a contract extension. I'm all for it, and there's a couple of different reasons why. I'll dive into those exact reasons in just a second here. But the first thing I wanted to do is kind of just unpack everything, what it would entail and where things stand with Zac Jones and his contract and whatnot. And in fact, let's start right there. His current contract that just wrapped up. Zac Jones just concluded a 2-year deal that carried an annual cap hit of just $813K per season. So just a shade over the league minimum. So actually right there, that's your first reason to re-sign him. The very simple fact that it's not going to cost very much. At most. Well, what's the biggest contract that Zac Jones is possibly going to get? Right now, as it stands, he is a restricted free agent with arbitration rights. He will not be an unrestricted free agent until 3 seasons from now. But even with those arbitration rights, again, the question that I propose to everybody is, what's the biggest contract that he could possibly hope to get? I don't think it's very high. Part of the reason for that is he never plays. I mean, how often have the Rangers made him a healthy scratch in favor of a defenseman who arguably isn't playing nearly as well as Zac Jones, isn't making as much of a positive impact as Zac Jones? I'm not making it out like Zac Jones is some Norris candidate, some future slam dunk Hall of Famer or anything like that. But there have been multiple times over the last half decade. Yes, he's been here for parts of 5 seasons, if you can possibly believe that. But there have been multiple instances where Zac Jones has had to ride the pine, or more accurately, I guess, watch from the press box, in favor of a defenseman that isn't playing well or isn't bring as much to the table as Zac Jones does. We've seen it over and over and over again. The joke that I always make on here is that Zac Jones is allowed to play only if there are no other options. If there's anybody else that could conceivably be inserted into the lineup over Zac Jones, that's what's going to happen. This past season, we see the Rangers trade for Urho Vakanainen. Jacob Trouba was shown the door, and nothing against Vakanainen. I think he's fine as like a number 7 defenseman, maybe a number 6 defenseman. He's okay, and it's not like he's getting paid big bucks or anything like that. But Zac Jones, I thought, was playing well for a good spell of last season. The next thing you know, he's in the press box for like 20 straight games in favor of, somebody like Urho Vakanainen, who himself, not a terrible defenseman, but for a lot of those games, I think it would have made sense to maybe have Zac Jones over there over Vakanainen. And I'm not picking on Vakanainen. He's just one example of many defensemen over the years that have gotten the nod over Zac Jones. And I know that there's a lot of Ranger fans out there. They're going to take one look at Zac Jones, look at his size, and say, yeah, I'm out. And to be fair, he is one of the smaller defensemen in the NHL. I don't know like the exact percentage, but I got to believe at the very least, he's got to be like in the bottom 10% in terms of overall size. And I know, you look at the playoffs and the Panthers just won the Stanley Cup again, and you want size and strength and nastiness and all that good stuff. I think it's okay to have one defenseman that's undersized. I think you can get by with that. If you want to go with giants, otherwise, be my guest. We've been talking about that on here, that whether it's the draft or free agency, the Rangers need to add some more size, some more nastiness, some more personality to this team. That's another thing. That's something that they need to do. But I think Zac Jones is your number 6 defenseman. I think you'll be okay. I don't think he's going to bring everything crashing down next season if he was to get that role. But that leads me to my next point. Because if Jones does re-sign with this team, and again, I can't imagine it'll be for more than $2 million a year at the absolute most. If he does re-sign, then I'd like to see him get an actual chance. I want to see him out there on opening night. I want to see him get a little bit of rope. The kind of rope that other guys get afforded that he just does not seem to be afforded. And again, I get the lack of size and everything, but he moves the puck a heck of a lot better than most Ranger defensemen. We talked about how that was an issue. Even 2 seasons ago, when the Rangers were the President's Trophy winners, when they were in the Eastern Conference Final, when they were going toe-to-toe with the Panthers, a big problem for the Rangers was getting trapped in their own zone for way too long. They had defensemen that just could not get the puck out of the zone. Zac Jones is very good at that. He sees the ice very well. He's a very accurate passer. He's got decent speed as well. He can carry the puck out of the zone himself if he needs to. He can quarterback the second power play. And honestly, he might be a more important player for the Rangers than we realize, because when you look at the Ranger blue line right now, and this is a topic that we've discussed on here, but there's a lot of uncertainty there. You look at somebody like Carson Soucy and K'Andre Miller. In fact, we can lump the two of them together. They are both strong candidates to be traded this upcoming season. I think there's a better chance that they're both traded than there is that neither one of them is traded. I feel like at some point you're just going to have to move on. I don't think the Rangers like what they saw from Soucy this past season. With Miller, I mean, how much longer are we going to talk about upside and potential and all this stuff? Miller, I was a big fan of him when he first came into the league. 2 years into his career, I thought he was going to be a star. I don't feel that way anymore. I don't like what I've seen in recent seasons, specifically the last 2 seasons with Miller, and especially this last season. The amount of mental mistakes, the amount of games where he just didn't seem all there. And to be fair, you can say the same thing about a lot of different Ranger players, but I don't know that K'Andre Miller has much of a future here. And it does sound like, per various reports, the Rangers are strongly considering trading him. And I think it might have been Frank Saravelli. Somebody reported not too long ago that there are like 13 to 15 teams that might have interest in K'Andre Miller. They can get a lot for him. So all this is to say that Soucy and Miller, very uncertain futures with the Rangers. That makes Zac Jones being here that much more important, because you got to fill out this lineup somehow, right? And at least with Zac Jones, you got some familiarity. You got somebody that's played more than 100 games with the New York Rangers. He does bring certain things to that table that other Ranger defensemen seem to lack. So for all those reasons, plus the fact that he'd be a pretty low cost as far as what his next contract would look like, I'm all in favor of bringing back Zac Jones. But we'll take it beyond Soucy and Miller here. There are other Rangers defensemen that have somewhat uncertain futures. Braden Schneider, I think, will be here this upcoming season. For reasons that are beyond me, there seem to be a lot of fans that are looking to push him out the door. Maybe not necessarily push him out the door, but he's kind of like everybody's favorite trade chip. If we're going to go out and get a JJ Peterka, whatever the situation might be, then maybe you trade Braden Schneider. Look, if you're bringing back a star player in exchange for Schneider, a star forward, then I'll at least hear you out. But trading Schneider just to trade him makes no sense to me, especially when he's signed for a very manageable $2.2 million this upcoming season. But we don't know how much longer Schneider is going to be here. He's an RFA with arbitration rights after the season ends. You've got guys like Matthew Robertson. I mean, he's an RFA with arbitration rights. He's played 2 games with the Rangers, 2 meaningless games. DeHaan's a UFA. I don't think he'll be back. I guess crazier things have happened. So what are we down to here as far as guys that are locked up? You've got Fox, you've got Borgen, and you've got Vakanainen, and that's about it. And Vakanainen, I was just talking about him. I see him at best as like a number 6 or 7 defenseman. So again, there's just not a lot of certainty there. There's a lot of Ranger defensemen that are coming off of some subpar or kind of mess seasons. So I would keep Jones there. And another reason, I mentioned K'Andre Miller a second ago, I think it just gives you that much more leverage on K'Andre Miller and his camp. At the very least, you've got a fallback option in place, right? Where if there's a situation where, oh man, I guess we're not going to come to an extension agreement with K'Andre Miller, let's go ahead and trade him. At least you've got Zac Jones in place. At least you've got another lefty defenseman who's there, who can fill out this roster, fill out the depth chart, at least fill out one of the 6 spots on opening night this upcoming season. And look, K'Andre Miller has his fans, and there's going to be some people that are unhappy if he gets traded. But at least you soften the blow a little bit if you get Zac Jones locked up. I would not be surprised at all if the Rangers try to move quickly on Zac Jones, try to get him to sign an extension in the short term right now. Maybe you're looking at like a 3-year deal that takes him to his first year of unrestricted free agency. You do that, and then, again, that's your fallback plan for if K'Andre Miller leaves. At least you've got somebody in place, somebody that you're familiar with. So I'm all for it. I love the idea of re-signing Zac Jones. Like I said, I'd like to see him get an opportunity next season. If he is in a 7th defenseman role, I mean, it wouldn't be an unfamiliar role for him. And it also kind of makes me wonder why Jones even wants to come back. I mean, if I'm Jones in his camp and the way that he's been in and out of the lineup these past bunch of seasons, I'd be probably looking for a fresh start. I'd be looking for a trade. But you know what? That just makes me want to cheer for Zac Jones even more, because there's a lot of players in his position that would be looking for the door. They'd be looking to get traded. They'd be looking to go somewhere else. And he wants to stay, apparently. I mean, I don't know how deep in conversation Drury, and Zac Jones and Jones's camp are as far as a contract extension. And that report was, about 4 or 5 days ago, whatever it was. And I haven't heard much about that since. But it looks like he's at least open to staying here with the Rangers. I want to see him actually get a chance. And again, for a defenseman who can round out the lineup and do so at an inexpensive cost, I think you can do a heck of a lot worse than Zac Jones. I'd like to see him be here. The other thing, too, that I got to mention, because maybe there's some people that say, oh, I'll just trade Jones and keep K'Andre Miller. You could do that, but you're not going to get anything for Zac Jones because Jones has barely played. I'm telling you, at the very worst, and we got that report there, 13 to 15 teams interested in K'Andre Miller, you will get a first-round draft pick in exchange for K'Andre Miller. I truly do believe that. If I'm wrong, I'll be the first person to stand up and admit it. But I think in this market, with not a lot of defensemen being available, somebody will give up a first-rounder. And if there really are that many teams interested in K'Andre Miller, then that's going to cause a bidding war, and that plays right into the Rangers' hands. So I'm all for locking up Zac Jones for the next 3 years at a reasonable cost. And if you have to trade K'Andre Miller, then so be it. Again, you can't keep everybody. That's kind of the theme on here. And I don't think you want to overextend yourself when it comes to K'Andre Miller, especially based on what we saw from him this past season. But in just a second, we're going to shift our attention to the Ranger goalie, Igor Shesterkin, and why I think this year's Stanley Cup playoffs provide all the evidence you could possibly need that locking up Igor Shesterkin long-term was indeed the right decision by the New York Rangers. We will get to that in just a second. All right, I want to go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers by chatting a little bit about the end of the season. Like I said, the Panthers just won their second Stanley Cup. They've won the Eastern Conference for 3 seasons in a row here and seem to have a stranglehold on the NHL right now. You watch the Stanley Cup playoffs, and honestly, nobody could really hold a candle to them. I know that. I mean, okay, the series against the Oilers did go 6 games. There were a lot of great games back and forth. We had overtime galore. We saw, obviously, Toronto take Florida to 7 games. But it just looks to me right now like they are just far above any other team in the NHL. They're kind of on a level of their own. Maybe not so much in the regular season. They're a good regular season team. They are an elite, just bruising Stanley Cup playoff team. And you tell me who stops them from getting a three-peat this upcoming season. I mean, it obviously could happen, but I haven't seen Stanley Cup champion odds for next season. I don't even know if they're out yet, but I would have to think the Florida Panthers are at the top of that list based on everything that we've just seen. But I do think that what we saw in the playoffs this year, as a whole, everything together, all 15 series that were played, it very much makes the case that the Rangers were in the right to pay Igor Shesterkin and keep him in the fold. I know they went a little overboard with the price and whatever, but you know what? When you have a franchise goalie, you do not let go of that franchise goalie. And I've had a lot of different debates with Ranger fans, hockey fans in general. How important is it exactly to have a big-time goalie in the Stanley Cup playoffs? Because if you want to have an elite goalie, you got to pay them, right? I mean, more often than not. You might have occasionally get somebody locked into a team-friendly deal. Maybe you can get ahead of it or, whatever the case might be. I mean, hey, Igor Shesterkin himself was on a very team-friendly deal up until this next season, this upcoming season, when his extension will kick in and he'll be making $11.5 million per season. But when you look at the lay of the land, you look at recent Stanley Cup champions or even not so recent Stanley Cup champions, and you take a look at the goalies that have been playing for those teams, I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't think it's an accident that a lot of the elite goalies, some of the greatest to ever play the game, are guys that end up as multiple-time Stanley Cup champions. Who do you want to go with? Patrick Waugh? Marty Brodeur? Dominic Hasek? Jonathan Quick? You could probably throw Sergei Bobrovsky into that list now, too. He's kind of had a weird career. He's been up and down and all over the place, and he's played for a couple of different teams. But when it's all said and done, yeah, you're going to be talking about Bobrovsky, I would say, at least as like a top 25, top 30 goalie all-time. And he now has 2 Stanley Cup championships to his name, and he's no small reason why they've won these Stanley Cup championships. You might occasionally have a season, have a team that wins the Stanley Cup with a really random kind of like whatever kind of goalie. Like I think maybe Matt Martin is a good example of that with the Penguins, a bunch of years ago. But there's not that many of them. And even guys that on the surface seem kind of random or just kind of like, well, that's a good but not great goalie. I was going through the list. A lot of these goalies, I think, are better than a lot of us might realize. Guys like Aiden Hill, guys like Darcy Kemper, I would even throw Corey Crawford in there as well. Aiden Hill has a cup with the Knights. Kemper got one with the Avalanche. Crawford got a couple with the Blackhawks as well. These guys, when you look at their career numbers, are better than you realize. And as far as like a random goalie, just mediocre, even subpar goalie winning the Stanley Cup, when's the last time that happened? The one name that I might be able to give you is somebody that I just mentioned, and that would be Aiden Hill with the Vegas Golden Knights. Because at the time, I think he was thought of as just kind of a guy. He's a goalie in the league. There was nothing like overly special about him. Not a terrible goalie either, but just kind of like an average starting goalie in the NHL. But when you look at what he's done, starting with that season that they won the Stanley Cup and the 2 seasons that have followed, I'm not so sure that he really was like a random mediocre goalie. That was his breakout season. Like, he was breaking out in real time, and it went all the way to the Knights winning the Stanley Cup. And he's been a very good goalie ever since then as well. Show me one of these, like, just kind of whatever goalies that's won a Stanley Cup recently or not recently. To me, it's always a guy that is either an elite Hall of Fame slam dunk inductee in the future, or somebody who's very good. Very good. We're talking like top 10, maybe top 12 in the league. Jordan Binnington might be an exception to that rule. I just thought of one. But honestly, like, you look at Binnington, that guy is as erratic as he can be, and as much attention as he gets for some of the extracurriculars and some off-ice controversies, and whatnot. That guy's a big-time goalie. That guy, if you got a Game 7 to win, to me, he might be in the top 5 in the league as far as somebody that you might between the pipes. I think he's really that good in big games when the lights are the brightest. And after watching the playoffs this past season, I feel better than ever about Igor Shesterkin's contract because nobody can hold a candle to him. Now, would I have liked the Rangers to have gotten an Igor extension done for $9 million, $10 million rather than 11.5? Sure. That would have been great. And I think there was kind of a situation where Drury was sort of bidding against himself when it came to the Igor extension. They offered him 8 years, $11 million. That wasn't good enough for Igor, even though it would have made him pay the highest paid goalie in the history of the league. It goes into the offseason, and it goes rather in a little bit later into the season. They get him signed at $11.5 million per season. So it would have been nice if they could have gotten it done for a little bit less money than they did. Would I have also preferred Igor Shesterkin's contract to not have a full no-move clause for the entirety of it? Yes, because you never know what's around the corner. There could be a situation in the future where the Rangers have to rebuild, and if Igor Shesterkin is still an elite goalie, you get a heck of a lot for him. And now he's got the full no move, and there's no guarantee that they would ever be able to trade Igor Shesterkin in such a scenario. But I'm at the point, like I said, after watching these playoffs, where I feel like Igor really is worth every dime that he gets. You look at his track record in the playoffs, 241 goals against average, 919 save percentage. For my money, Igor Shesterkin has had 2 bad Stanley Cup playoff games in his entire career. It was Game 3 and Game 4 against the Penguins in the first round during Gerard Gallant's first year with the New York Rangers. Other than that, he's been anywhere from good to absolutely show-stealing phenomenal. And when you watch the other elite goalies in this year's playoffs, or the supposedly elite goalies, guys like Connor Hellebuck, guys like Jake Ottinger, they both struggled at times. And Hellebuck, that's become a trend recently. And Ottinger, I never would have pulled him out of Game 5 the way that Peter DeBoer did, but facts are facts. He didn't have his best stuff in this year's playoffs either. He's been better than Hellebuck over the years, has Ottinger, but I don't think any of them are on the level of Igor Shesterkin. And I realized that by naming other elite goalies like this, the people that don't think that you should pay mega bucks to a goalie, you have maybe a little bit more ammunition there. But we are talking about goalies that have won the Stanley Cup, more so than guys that have not won the Stanley Cup. Not every elite goalie is going to win the Stanley Cup every season. So I think the ultimate barometer is to look at elite goalies that have won the Stanley Cup. And there's a lot of them. And they are in no small part the reason why their respective teams have won the Stanley Cup. So all this is to say that I feel better than ever about Igor Shesterkin making the big bucks, obviously having the biggest contract for any goalie in the history of the sport. I also saw a report, for anybody that still might not be convinced, I saw a report not too long ago that with the way the NHL salary cap is projected to rise in upcoming seasons, Igor Shesterkin will possibly this upcoming season, but no later than the season after that, be taking up less than 10% of the Rangers salary cap. And I know a lot of people look at the $11.5 million. It's a staggering number. It's a big number. And it's like, whoa, that is big time, right? And I understand why, and I've certainly done that too. what you really have to look at, what percentage of the salary cap is Igor Shesterkin taking up? That's going to go down with every passing year as the salary cap continues to rise at a greater rate than it ever has, I think, in NHL history, certainly in any kind of recent NHL history. That's what's really important. So, look, Igor could be making $25 million a season. If it's only taking up 5% of the salary cap, I don't care about that. That's a great deal. That's what you have to look at. You have to look at the percentage. Igor Shesterkin right now is over 10%, but like I said, in the next coming years, he'll be taking up under 10% of the Rangers salary cap. And I don't think that's an unreasonable ask for a goalie that has now clearly established himself, for my money, as the absolute best big game goalie in the NHL. I don't think it's particularly close. A lot of his peers, like I just mentioned, have struggled in the playoffs. Igor has never struggled in the playoffs. Igor has been the driving force of the Rangers in the playoffs. So for all those reasons, give me Igor Shesterkin making all the money that he is. Again, it would be nice if it was a little bit less than where he was at right now, but this is not going to be the contract that dooms the Rangers. There might be some other contracts that doom the Rangers, but it's not going to be paying top dollar for the guy who is the best big game goalie in the NHL. So I've said my piece on that. We'll call it there. It's good to be back talking to you guys about Ranger hockey once again. And looking forward to recording some more episodes this week. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.